Welcome to a deep dive. Today we're going to explore this idea of mental immunity. Like how our minds can fight back against bad ideas.
Yeah, interesting topic.
We're diving deep into mental immunity, infectious ideas, mind parasites, and the search for a better way to think. It's by Andy Norman.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one.
Have you read it?
I have. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I think a lot of us can relate to feeling just overwhelmed with information these days. And this book offers some pretty interesting tools for navigating that.
It really does. So right off the bat, Norman uses this analogy of our minds having an immune system, kind of like, our bodies do.
Right.
He argues that just as our bodies fight off diseases, our minds need to develop these defenses against mind parasites.
Yeah, mind parasites, that's a pretty powerful image.
It is. So what exactly are these mind parasites, and why should we even be worried about them?
Well, Norman argues that mind parasites are essentially harmful beliefs or ideas, harmful to individuals or, to society as a whole.
So it's not just about being wrong about something. It's about ideas that can actually cause some real damage.
Right, exactly. And they can spread just like viruses, often kind of exploiting our emotions and biases and those social dynamics.
So that's a little scary when you think about it. Like our minds can be infected in this way.
It is, and it's something we see all around us. You've got
Yeah.
conspiracy theories and harmful stereotypes and all these political ideologies that just divide people.
I see that everywhere.
And so Norman argues that we really need to develop this kind of cognitive immunology to protect ourselves. It's really urgent.
All right, so the book is broken down into 3 parts.
Okay.
Let's just take them one by one.
Yeah.
So starting with part 1, the problem of ideology. The first chapter is called Mind Parasites and the Metaphysics of Misbelief. And it basically lays out Norman's central argument.
Okay.
He says that the human mind is vulnerable to these infectious ideas.
Right.
And it's almost like we need mental vaccines, to protect ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. What are some of the ways these mind parasites take hold? Like, how does that actually happen?
Well, in Chapter 2, Untold Story, Norman really dives into Jonathan Haidt's research on this tribal nature of human thinking.
Right, hate it. Yeah, his work is really interesting.
Yeah, Haidt suggests that our brains are wired for this, like, group loyalty,
Makes sense.
which is a good thing in many ways, but it can also make us incredibly resistant to evidence, especially if it contradicts, our group's beliefs.
Oh, yeah, totally. I've definitely seen that.
Think about it. You see people defending their political party no matter what,
Mm-hmm.
or blindly following certain social media influencers.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like this tribal instinct kicking in. It's like our critical thinking just goes out the window when our group identity is at stake.
It is unsettling.
It is.
And then in Chapter 3, The Call to Arms, Norman takes this analogy even further. He compares this work of cognitive immunology to network security specialists,
Mm-hmm.
the people who are battling malware.
Oh, interesting.
So just like we have antivirus software for our computers, we kind of need something similar for our minds.
Yeah, to protect ourselves from those bad ideas, those ideological pathogens.
Exactly. So that makes me wonder about all the traditional ways we try to, fight bad ideas,
Mm-hmm.
like using reason and science. I mean, have we always tried to combat misinformation?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the classic approach, right?
But then in Chapter 4, For Experiments, Norman actually argues that those approaches have some serious limitations.
Really? I mean, reason and science seem pretty powerful, How could they fall short?
Well, he says that while reason is a great tool, it can easily be hijacked by our biases.
Oh, that's true.
And science, well, it's amazing at explaining, the natural world.
Right.
It struggles when it comes to things like ethics, politics, and religion.
Yeah, those are trickier areas.
And those are the areas where a lot of these mind parasites kind of thrive.
Yeah, because there's not always clear-cut, scientific answers.
Right. So it's like science gives us the facts,
Mm-hmm.
but it can't tell us how to live our lives or what to believe in.
Exactly.
And while critical thinking skills are valuable, he thinks that they often focus too much on these very specific techniques
Oh, I see.
and not enough on cultivating that mindset that makes us more resistant to bad ideas in the first place.
So it's not just about having the tools, but like how we use them and what kind of thinkers we are at our core.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
And he actually shares a little anecdote about teaching critical thinking through this lens of cognitive immunology.
Oh, cool.
He found that when he framed it this way, his students were way more engaged.
That makes sense.
They started seeing questions and arguments as these cognitive antibodies, and they were much more open to challenging their own beliefs.
It's like that reframing, like you were saying, made it way more relatable and engaging for them. It's less about being right and more about actually trying to find the truth, even if it means changing our minds, which is hard.
Right, and I think that leads us perfectly to Chapter 5, Our Will to Believe,
Okay.
where Norman explores another factor that makes us so vulnerable to mind parasites,
All right, what's that?
our emotional needs. And this need to belong, to feel like you're part of a group.
Yeah, everyone wants to feel like they belong. That's a powerful human need.
And Norman argues that this desire can make us, well, incredibly resistant to evidence,
Hmm.
especially if it challenges our group identity. He actually talks about this identity protective cognition, which is basically, our tendency to defend our beliefs even when they're wrong.
Oh, yeah, we all do that. Like, if someone criticizes my favorite band, I'm way more likely to defend them, even if they're wrong, because liking that band is part of who I am.
Exactly. It's not just about bands, though, right?
No, it could be anything. Political parties, religious beliefs, our views on social issues.
We often cling to those beliefs that reinforce our sense of belonging,
Right.
even if they're not based on reason or, actual
Yeah,
evidence.
well, that's powerful.
So we're not just thinking machines, are we?
No, definitely not.
Our emotions and social dynamics play a huge role in what we actually believe.
Mm.
It makes the problem of combating these mind parasites even more complex, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It's not enough to just present people with facts and logic. We have to address those underlying emotional and social factors that are influencing their beliefs in the first place.
Okay, well, this is all starting to paint a pretty challenging picture.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here?
Well, that's what the rest of the book really explores.
Yeah.
He dives into the ethics of belief, the social norms that make reasoning possible,
Right.
and ultimately he gives us some practical strategies for building those better mental immune systems.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. I'm definitely intrigued.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Rambling Dan Rowe's Deep Dive Book Reviews. Please help support our channel by clicking the like and subscribe button. Thank you.
All right, so we're back, and we're diving right into part 2 of mental immunity, which is called Mind Parasites and Public Health. It seems like Norman is starting to really grapple with this problem, like how to actually address these infectious ideas on a larger scale.
Yeah, for sure. This section is all about how we can regulate belief without resorting to censorship, which is a really tricky thing to do.
Yeah, how do we balance individual freedom with protecting society from harmful ideas?
It's a tough one, and that's exactly what Norman is wrestling with here. The first chapter in this part is the ethics of faith, and it dives into this whole question of, whether it's morally okay to believe things on faith.
That's a big one. People have really strong opinions about faith, especially when it comes to religion.
Yeah, for sure. It can be a real minefield.
So how does Norman approach this debate?
Well, he starts by bringing up these two prominent thinkers, W.K. Clifford and William James. Clifford was a big proponent of evidence-based belief.
Okay.
He argued that it's always wrong to believe anything without enough evidence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was pretty firm on that.
I can see how that could be controversial.
Totally. And to illustrate his point, he used this thought experiment called the ship owner parable.
Oh, okay. What's that?
So imagine this ship owner who's about to send a ship full of immigrants across the ocean, but he knows that the ship is old and needs repairs.
Oh.
But instead of getting it fixed, he convinces himself that it's seaworthy, just based on faith. Like, he has this blind faith that it'll be fine.
I can see where this is going.
Yeah, and of course, the ship sinks, everyone on board dies.
Oh, that's awful.
It's a tragic story, and Clifford's point is that the ship owner was morally responsible for those deaths, because he chose to believe without evidence and put all those lives at risk.
That's a pretty powerful argument against blind faith.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the consequences of our beliefs.
So what about William James? He had a different perspective, right? I know he was a pragmatist.
Right, and James had a bit more nuanced take on it.
Okay.
He acknowledged that, yeah, faith can be dangerous, but he also argued that there are times when believing without sufficient evidence can actually be beneficial or even necessary.
Interesting. So, when are those times?
Well, he called it the right to believe. And he said, it applies when you're faced with a genuine option.
What's a genuine option?
It's this choice between two hypotheses that are both live, forced, and momentous.
Okay, break that down for me.
Right, so live just means that it's something you could plausibly believe.
Okay.
Forced means you can't avoid making a choice, you have to pick one or the other. And momentous means the stakes are high, like there's significant consequences depending on which way you go.
So it's not just like any random decision. It's something really important where there's no clear answer based on evidence alone.
Exactly.
So what did James think people should do in those situations?
He basically said that you have a right to let your passions and your values influence your belief. It's like sometimes the act of believing can actually help bring about the outcome you want, like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I can see that.
Now, he wasn't saying to just ignore evidence entirely, but that other factors can sometimes tip the scales when the evidence is unclear.
That's really interesting. So if you have to choose between two paths and the evidence isn't clear, you might as well choose the one that gives you hope or aligns with your values.
Right.
I mean, it makes sense. But doesn't that open the door for people to justify all kinds of crazy beliefs?
Yeah, for sure. And Norman brings that up too. He points out that even though James championed this right to believe, he also emphasized that it comes with responsibilities.
So you can't just believe whatever you want and say, hey, it's my right.
Exactly. You have to consider the consequences, both for yourself and for others.
Makes sense.
So Norman is pushing for this kind of responsible faith that recognizes its limits and considers the well-being of other people.
Okay, so how do we regulate belief in a way that respects freedom but also protects society? I mean, that seems almost impossible.
It's a tough balance to strike, and that's the focus of Chapter 7, Thought Police Need Not Apply. He explores all sorts of methods, from censorship to education to social norms, and he points out that we already regulate belief in many ways, through schools, laws, the language we use. It's just a matter of how we do it effectively and ethically.
So what's his take on how to do that? What's the best way?
Yeah, well, he really emphasizes the importance of personal responsibility. Like, he wants people to develop these habits of mind that make them more resistant to misinformation and more open to evidence.
So it's less about someone else telling you what to believe and more about cultivating your own ability to be critical.
Exactly. But he also stresses the importance of social norms. Like, we need to foster a culture that values reason-giving dialogue and evidence-based decision-making.
Yeah, but how do we shift those social norms? I mean, it seems like we're moving further and further away from that with all the polarization and echo chambers online.
You're right, it's a huge challenge. Norman thinks education plays a crucial role. Like, he's really big on teaching critical thinking skills from a young age,
Yeah.
Help people spot fallacies, evaluate arguments, all that good stuff.
That makes sense. Give people the tools to navigate this crazy world of information.
Exactly.
But it can't just be formal education, right?
Right. It's about fostering this culture of open inquiry in all areas of life, where it's okay to question things, challenge assumptions, have these respectful debates.
That sounds lovely, but it's tough to imagine in practice. Everyone's so defensive, especially online.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Something we all struggle with. And Norman addresses this directly. He brings up this concept of reason's fulcrum in Chapter 8.
Okay, reasons fulcrum, what's that about?
So he argues that for reasoning to actually work, there needs to be this shared social norm that we should yield to good reasons, even if they challenge our own beliefs.
I can see that. So we agree to play by the rules of logic and evidence, even if it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. And this norm is so crucial because without it, reasoning breaks down and we become more susceptible to those mind parasites.
So reasons fulcrum is like this agreement to play fair in the game of reasoning.
Exactly.
But it does seem like that agreement is breaking down. Why is it so hard to change our minds, even when we probably should?
Well, Chapter 9, Reason Under the Microscope, gets into that. Norman starts by defining what a reason is. And he says it's not just a piece of information, but something that can justify a belief or an action.
Okay.
And the point of a reason is to change minds.
So you can't just have reasons.
Yeah,
You have to use them in a way that actually persuades people.
exactly.
Makes sense.
And he talks about all those cognitive biases that, distort our thinking. Things like motivated reasoning, confirmation bias, that tendency to just ignore good reasons if we don't like them.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that.
Right.
It's not just about a lack of intelligence, right?
Yeah.
It's about how our minds work, our emotions, and all those social influences swirling around.
For sure. And he actually shares this anecdote about a friend who had these faith-based beliefs that went against scientific evidence. And he uses it to show how faith, while it can offer comfort, can also be used to justify harmful or irrational beliefs.
So he's not dismissing faith altogether,
Yeah.
but cautioning us to be aware of how it can sometimes blind us to reason.
Exactly. He's arguing for a more balanced approach that recognizes both the limits of faith and the limits of reason, and the importance of intellectual humility.
Okay, I like that. This idea of balance keeps coming up.
It's a recurring theme for sure.
Being open to being wrong and, like you said, engaging in this respectful dialogue.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the final part of the book, where Norman really starts offering some concrete solutions for how we can actually build those better mental immune systems.
All right, so we've talked about this whole problem of mind parasites, how they spread, why it's so hard to fight them.
Right. Those pesky mind parasites.
Now let's get to the good stuff.
Yeah, the solutions.
What can we actually do to build better mental immune systems? That's what part 3 is all about, building better immune systems.
This is where Norman gets really practical, yeah.
So chapter 11, seductive misconceptions. He starts by tackling some common misconceptions, but, well, about reason itself.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
He looks at the history of philosophical thought on reason. And he argues that some ideas, even though they seem rational on the surface, they've actually made our cognitive defenses weaker.
Wait, so our ideas about reason could actually make us more vulnerable to bad ideas? That's trippy.
It is, right? It's like this weird paradox. He argues that some of those traditional models of reason, they set the bar way too high.
Okay.
And that can lead to this kind of extreme skepticism, like where it's hard to believe anything with any real confidence.
Oh, I see. So you're so afraid of being wrong that you just end up being swayed by anyone who sounds confident.
Exactly, even if they're, full of it. And he uses that immunology analogy again here
Oh.
to explain how that kind of skepticism can actually weaken our mental defenses. It's like having an immune system that attacks everything.
Right, even the good stuff.
So how do we find that balance then between healthy skepticism and, actually believing in things?
Yeah, that's the sweet spot.
That's where his concept of challenges comes in.
Challenges, are there?
He introduces that in chapter 12, challenges and their ecology. And he says these challenges act like, cognitive antibodies.
Oh, okay.
And they help us identify and neutralize those bad ideas.
So what are challenges in this context?
Well, they're essentially questions, questions that we direct at a specific claim.
So instead of just constantly questioning everything, you focus your skepticism on those claims that seem, kind of shaky.
Right, the ones that set off your mental BS detector. And he divides these challenges into 2 main types.
Okay, what are they?
Bear challenges and onus-bearing challenges.
Bear and onus-bearing.
A bear challenge just questions the claim without giving a specific reason for doubting it. Like just saying, how do you know that's true?
Okay, so it's kind of like raising an eyebrow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then an onus-bearing challenge, that's where you actually present some grounds for doubting the claim.
So you come with evidence or counter-arguments?
Yeah, you bring receipts.
I like that.
And Norman says both types are important,
Mm-hmm.
But we need to be careful not to overuse those bear challenges. Too much of that, and you just end up in this this unproductive skepticism.
Right. It's about finding the right balance, knowing when to question and when to actually demand some solid proof.
And then he talks about 2 more really important concepts.
Okay.
Presumptions and burden of proof.
All right, I'm intrigued.
Presumptions are claims we just accept as true by default, unless there's a good reason to doubt them.
So things like the Earth is round or gravity exists.
Right. It's like the foundation of our knowledge. We don't need to reprove them every time we have a conversation.
Makes sense.
And then burden of proof.
Mm.
That's the responsibility to, provide evidence or arguments for a claim, especially when it challenges a widely held presumption.
So if you're going to come after something that pretty much everyone agrees on,
Yeah.
you better have a good reason.
You better have your ducks in a row.
Yeah.
And Norman believes that understanding these concepts, challenges, presumptions, burden of proof, they're crucial for building a more robust mental immune system.
Yeah, it gives us a framework for deciding which claims need to be defended and how much evidence is actually enough. It keeps things fair and productive.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. And in Chapter 13, the new Socratic model, he uses these concepts to propose a new model of reasonable belief.
Oh, new model.
A new model, one that kind of builds on those strengths of those previous models, but addresses some of their weaknesses.
Okay, so how is this new Socratic model different from those old ones?
Well, like Socrates, he still emphasizes, questioning and challenging beliefs.
But unlike those traditional Socratic methods, which can sometimes lead to this this endless cycle of questioning and doubt.
Yeah.
Norman's model incorporates those concepts of presumptions and burden of proof.
So it gives us a way to ground the questioning, a way to actually reach some conclusions.
Exactly. It's more grounded, more practical.
I like that.
And it's designed to help us develop this more balanced cognitive immune response, one that can, filter out those bad ideas without rejecting everything.
So you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're keeping the good stuff while getting rid of the bad.
Right. And it's amazing how he combines these philosophical ideas with, insights from immunology. It's like he's creating a whole new language to understand how our minds work.
He is. It's pretty brilliant.
And he doesn't stop there. In Chapter 14, The Moral Immune System, he actually extends this model to moral reasoning.
More reasoning.
Yeah, he argues that our moral judgments, they're just as susceptible to biases and distortions as any other belief.
So we need those mental defenses against bad moral ideas, not just factual ones.
Exactly. And he says we need to cultivate this moral curiosity.
Moral curiosity, okay.
A willingness to actually examine our own values and assumptions, even the ones that feel, most deeply held.
It's so easy to just assume that our moral beliefs are correct, and not even question them.
Right, we can get complacent. He's challenging us to apply those same critical thinking skills to our moral beliefs.
To recognize that even our most cherished values, they might be flawed.
Yeah, or at least incomplete.
He's calling for a more thoughtful approach to ethics, one that recognizes that these moral issues are complex and require ongoing reflection and conversation.
And he offers some actual strategies for having those difficult conversations too.
That's great, because we need those tools.
Then in Chapter 15, Crafting a Worldview Worth Sharing, he brings all of these ideas together and offers a vision for how we can actually create a more rational and informed society.
All right, so what's the recipe for a better world, according to Norman?
Well, he emphasizes that building that strong mental immune system, it's not a one-time thing. It's this ongoing process.
Right, we got to keep working at it.
It requires intellectual humility, a commitment to being open to new information.
So no quick fixes.
He suggests practical steps, questioning our assumptions, seeking out diverse perspectives,
Right.
engaging in constructive dialogue, being willing to change our minds.
Those are all really good habits to develop.
It's like practicing intellectual hygiene, regularly examining our beliefs and making sure they're still, well supported.
I love that analogy, intellectual hygiene.
And he cautions against what he calls intellectual complacency,
Oh, that's a good word.
that tendency to just accept what we already believe without questioning it.
Yeah, I know. I've been guilty of that. We all have.
He thinks we need to engage in more self-reflection, be willing to challenge those cherished beliefs.
It's hard, but it's so important.
It makes you wonder, what if we all took his advice seriously? What kind of world could we actually create?
Yeah, what would that look like?
And that's the vision he lays out in the final chapter, Reason's Triumph.
Okay.
He imagines a future where this cognitive immunology actually helps us create a world based on reason, understanding, and collaboration.
That sounds pretty amazing.
It does.
Is it really possible?
He's optimistic. He compares it to the success of immunology in fighting those physical diseases and suggests that maybe we can even develop, mental vaccines to protect ourselves from harmful ideas.
That's a powerful image. Just as vaccines have eradicated those deadly diseases, maybe we can find ways to protect ourselves from harmful beliefs too.
And the book ends with a call to action,
What's the call to action?
He's urging us to embrace these principles of cognitive immunology, to contribute to building a more rational and informed society. It's a pretty inspiring message.
Yeah.
So, after taking this deep dive into mental immunity, what's the biggest takeaway for you?
I think it's that we're not helpless. We have the power to build up our mental defenses, to become more discerning about the information we consume, and to engage in those more productive conversations. Even when it's tough.
Yeah.
It takes effort and, a willingness to challenge ourselves. But I think the rewards are worth it.
Absolutely. It's this call to action to become more thoughtful, more critical, and more responsible in how we think. And if you're ready to take on that challenge, I highly recommend checking out Andy Norman's Mental Immunity. It might just change the way you think.
It might, yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.